Welcome to the Public Gems Podcast, where we do deep dives into movies and TV shows from the Golden Age and beyond. Today, we're tackling a real gem, sifting through your sources on a British series that, well, it really made waves back in the day.
Yeah, we're talking The Adventures of Sir Lancelot. You hear the name, you think knights, Camelot, all that classic stuff. But looking at the guide you sent, there's way more to it, isn't there? Historically, technically, it's fascinating.
Absolutely. So our mission today really is to pull out what made this show so special for its time, why people still talk about it, some of the stories behind making it. We're talking groundbreaking tech, even a bit of behind-the-scenes drama.
Exactly. It's not just what the show was about, but why it mattered. You know, its place in TV history, especially if you're interested in how broadcasting changed, or even how, like, real-world politics could sneak into making a show about King Arthur. Okay, let's dive in.
Right. So, The Adventures of Sir Lancelot. It first hit screens in 1956. Tell us a bit about where it came from.
Okay, so it was a British production made by Sapphire Films for ITC Entertainment. And it first showed on ITV over in the UK. William Russell played Lancelot, obviously set in King Arthur's court, Camelot, you know, the familiar setting.
In ITC, they were quite big, weren't they?
Oh, yeah. ITC Entertainment was a major player, part of Lou Grade's Associated Television. They really knew how to make shows that could sell internationally, which turns out to be pretty key for Lancelot.
Okay, and that international angle leads us somewhere really interesting, especially for 1956, color television. That seems incredibly early.
It was early, and that's what makes it such a landmark. So, yeah, it started in black and white in the UK, but it did really well in the US. NBC picked it up over there from 56 to 57.
Right.
And NBC, well, they were pushing color big time. They needed shows, you know, content to show off this amazing new technology, so they made a deal. And The Adventures of Sir Lancelot actually became the first British TV series ever to have whole episodes filmed in color.
Wow, so actual episodes shot in color back in the mid-50s. That's pretty huge.
It really was a massive step for a British show. Specifically, it was episodes 16 through 20, and then 22 right through to 30. They shot those entirely on color film stock.
Okay, but there's a catch. Right?
Yeah, here's the thing. Those color episodes, they were only shown in color in the U.S. when they first aired. NBC viewers got the full color experience.
But back in the UK.
Still black and white. Color TV broadcasting just wasn't a thing there yet, not widely anyway. So for the home audience, all that vibrant color was, well, it was invisible for years.
So a British show, made in Britain, but the fancy color was initially just for the American market, driven by NBC's push.
Exactly. It shows that transatlantic relationship, doesn't it? And you mentioned earlier attempts at color.
Yeah, wasn't there something like Zoo Quest?
Right. Good point. The BBC Zoo Quest from 1954, it did use color film before Lancelot. But, and this is the key difference, that was only for the bits they shot out on location. The studio parts of Zoo Quest were still done with standard black and white TV cameras. Sir Lancelot took the leap and filmed entire episodes, studio bits and all, on color film for those later ones. That was the real innovation.
And they were making all this happen at Nettlefold Studios.
That's right. Nettlefold Studios in Walton-on-Thames. Yeah, a classic British studio. It really shows how sometimes these big tech advances were pulled forward by demand from bigger markets, like the U.S. in this case.
It's amazing how global the media business was, even then.
It really is. That NBC money, that demand for color content, it clearly gave ITC and Sapphire Films the push, and maybe the budget, to try something so ambitious. It let a British production complete on a different level technologically.
So beyond the cameras and the color film, the sources you sent point to a really compelling human angle behind the scenes, specifically with the writers.
Yeah, this part is fascinating. It really makes you think, how did the Cold War end up influencing a show about knights in shining armor?
Right. Seems worlds apart.
Well, like quite a few other British shows and films around that time, The Adventures of Sir Lancelot actually used several American screenwriters, writers who'd basically been forced out of Hollywood.
You mean the Hollywood blacklist?
Exactly. These were writers who couldn't get work in the U.S. anymore because of the McCarthy-era paranoia, accusations of communist ties, that sort of thing. So they moved to Britain.
Wow. So talented people, basically exiled from their industry, found work in the UK.
Precisely. Britain's film, and especially its growing independent TV industry, like with ITC, it became a sort of refuge. And often these writers had to use pseudonyms, fake names.
To avoid causing problems.
Yeah, to avoid drawing attention or jeopardizing the production. The sources name people like Ian McClellan Hunter, Highcraft, Ring Lardner Jr. It just highlights how these huge global political situations can ripple out and affect something as seemingly straightforward as making a TV show.
That adds such a layer to it. Knowing that some of the people writing these adventures of chivalry and justice were themselves dealing with, well, injustice and political pressure in their own lives.
You have to wonder if that seeped into the writing, don't you? Maybe unconsciously. Themes of loyalty, fighting against unfairness. Perhaps they resonated a bit more deeply for writers who were living through that kind of experience.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, let's shift from the writers to the people on screen. Who brought Camelot to life? Who were the key players?
Well, front and center, obviously, was William Russell as Sir Lancelot. He was in every single one of the 30 episodes. That consistency, having that heroic figure week after week was really important.
He was the anchor.
Totally. He really embodied that kind of noble knight ideal. Then you had Merlin, the wizard. Cyril Smith played him in most episodes, 24 of them. He brought that sort of wise, sometimes a bit quirky magic element.
And King Arthur.
King Arthur, yeah, mostly played by Ronald Lee Hunt. He did 22 episodes and really defined the role for the series. Though, interestingly, Bruce Seaton actually played Arthur in the first 3 episodes.
Oh, okay. A little switch early on.
Yeah. And then there was Lancelot's squire, Brian, played by Robert Scroggins. Kind of the eyes and ears for younger viewers, maybe. And Queen Guinevere was played by Jane Hilton. So, yeah, a pretty solid core cast for most of the run.
Which helps, right? Lets the audience really connect with these characters over time.
Definitely. In those early days of TV especially, having familiar faces week after week was crucial for building that connection, making you feel like you were part of that world.
Okay, so we got the cast, we've got the tech. Let's talk about the stories themselves.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of adventures was Lancelot actually having?
Well, they kick things off strong. The very first episode, The Knight with the Red Plume, is basically Lancelot's entrance exam for the Round Table. He has to prove he's got the right stuff. Classic origin setup. Really established his character right away.
Sets the scene nicely. What about some more dramatic stuff? Any kidnappings or major threats?
Oh, yeah. There's one called The Queen's Knight. Pretty classic plot. Queen Guinevere gets nabbed by Sir Mordred, the bad guy. And Lancelot, of course, has to ride to the rescue. High stakes.
Always a good trope.
And they weren't all just fighting. There were clever plots, too, like the magic sword. Merlin uses Lancelot's sword, but not for Lancelot to fight with. He uses it to kind of boost the confidence of this other knight who's a bit cowardly. Shows that courage isn't just about swinging a sword.
That's quite thoughtful.
Yeah.
Now, going back to the color episodes, can you give us an example of one of those story-wise?
Sure. Let's take episode 16, The Ruby of Radnor. This was one of the very first ones shot in color. The story is about Lancelot's squire, Brian. He's just supposed to be delivering some pigeons. A simple job, right?
Sounds harmless enough.
But he ends up getting tangled up with these thieves who've stolen a really valuable ruby. So, a small errand blows up into a proper adventure. And imagine seeing that ruby, the costumes, everything suddenly in color if you were watching on NBC.
Yeah, must have been amazing. Any others in color that stand out?
Well, episode 17, The Lesser Breed. That one starts with reports of a horrible monster terrorizing a village. Lancelot goes to investigate.
And it turns out to be
Vikings. Which is a cool twist, right? Blending that sort of local monster myth fear with actual historical invaders. Again, seeing those Viking costumes and ships, presumably, in color would have been quite something.
Definitely. It shows how they matched the exciting stories with the new tech. Any other plots you found particularly interesting?
There's one called Theft of Excalibur. It happens on St. Stephen's Day, when tradition says the knights and squires swap places for the day. Just for fun,
Uh-huh.
But during this topsy-turvy day, the actual sword Excalibur goes missing. So it's this kind of mystery mixed with a bit of comedy, maybe, about roles and responsibility.
Sounds fun.
And another color one, The Thieves. This one's quite interesting, actually. King Arthur and Lancelot disguise themselves as criminals.
Really? Why?
To test Lancelot's theory. He believes that maybe not all thieves are just evil, that some might be driven to it by, starvation or desperation. Which, for a 1950s adventure show, is a surprisingly nuanced idea, isn't it, looking at social factors?
Yeah, that's more complex than you might expect. So, okay, the show runs its course. UK debut September 56, US later that month. Wraps up the first run in 57. What happened after that? Did it just disappear, or did it find a life later on, maybe on video?
It definitely found a second life, which is great for a show that old. Took a while, but yeah, eventually it came out on DVD. The whole series, all 30 episodes. Network DVD released it in the UK back in 2004.
And in the U.S.
Timeless Media Group put it out in the U.S. in 2008. So yeah, fans and, people interested in TV history could finally get the whole thing in one place.
That's good news for preservation. But didn't the whole color situation have one more twist, even with the DVDs?
Ah, yes. The color saga continues. It's quite quirky. So remember, there were 14 episodes originally shot in color.
Right, for U.S. broadcasts.
Well, on those DVD releases, only 12 of those 14 are actually presented in color.
Wait, what happened to the other two?
According to the notes with the release, the other two color episodes, The Ugly Duckling and The Missing Princess, they're included, but only from black and white prints. The reason given was basically financial reasons.
So even on the modern DVD set, you can't see all the color episodes as they were originally filmed and shown in the U.S.
Nope, isn't that something? It just shows how tricky and expensive restoring and preserving old film can be. Maybe the original color masters for those two were lost, damaged, or just too costly to transfer properly. So the full color experience is still slightly incomplete, even now.
That's a real shame, but also a fascinating insight into the challenges of media archiving. Any other little quirks or errors that crept into the DVD release sometimes happens with older material?
It does, and this raises that question again about, how carefully historical media gets handled. There's a specific error noted in your sources on the DVD set. It involved the end credits.
Okay.
For episode 24, which is called The Bridge, the end credits shown are actually the credits for a different episode, number 22, Double Identity.
Oh, so the wrong credits roll.
Exactly. Which means the actress who played Angela in The Bridge, Zena Walker, she doesn't get her credit on that episode. And Howard Payes, who was the star of Double Identity, well, his name pops up incorrectly at the end of The Bridge.
Huh. A small detail, maybe. But it matters for accuracy, doesn't it? And for the actors involved.
For sure. It's just another little reminder of the complexities involved when you're digging back through archives 50 years later and trying to piece everything together perfectly for a release.
Yeah.
Mistakes can happen.
Wow. So, The Adventures of Sir Lancelot. It really was more than just knights and castles, wasn't it? A genuine trailblazer with the color film for British TV, that unexpected link to the Hollywood blacklist, plus the adventures themselves. A proper deep dive into early TV, a real public gem.
Absolutely. It just reminds you that even shows that seem, kind of simple on the surface, they can have all these hidden layers. Technology, politics, the challenges of just getting it made. It's a snapshot of a specific time in media history, not just an Arthurian fantasy.
Totally agree. So for you, the listener, what's the takeaway here? Maybe it's about looking again at some of those other Golden Age shows you might remember or discover. What other secrets might they hold? What groundbreaking things were happening just off screen? Or what bigger world events were shaping them?
Or maybe think about that color issue. How important is it to you to see something exactly as it was first intended? And what does it mean when, sometimes due to cost or lost materials or even just mistakes, that's not quite possible anymore? Something to chew on next time you're watching a classic.